Welcome, everyone, to Industrial Tech Stack Live. We appreciate you joining us for the second session. I'm happy to see familiar faces joining us today. Our guest, Julie Runez, has done a great job with getting the conversation going within the community, and she has put together two similar sessions like this one. We're happy to be receiving the baton and growing this into a valuable community that will attract professionals who own these tech stacks at industrial companies beyond just the marketers. My name is Salim Malouf. I'm an industrial engineer turned marketer and co-founder of Conveying Your Message, a sustainable growth agency focused on the industrial and manufacturing space. But don't think of me as your host, as this is not a webinar or presentation. Think of me more as your facilitator. So this is an open floor for discussion. So I encourage you to come on stage and ask your questions or simply share your wins and losses when it comes to your own tech stacks. Julie, I'm sure many here are familiar with your work, but for those who aren't, can you please tell us a bit about yourself and the work you do at Lehnen Industrial Services?
Yeah, I have been handling marketing for Lehnen Industrial for about 3 years now. And this conversation in particular came out of our own journey trying to figure out what tech stack would work best for us. There's a lot of conversation in our local community here in New Hampshire about ERP systems and what works and what doesn't. And so that's really what kind of pushed this conversation for me. As it seems like marketing seems to kind of be the frontline entry point into this tech stack conversation, which seemed really odd to me. But when you think about it, at least from my experience in my company coming in, I was the first person to take on a marketing role in this company. And so when in the process of figuring it out, how do we present ourselves to the world? We look at those core values and we look at, our vision and our mission and say, okay, how are we presenting that? How does the customer experience reflect that? And it just sort of seems like a natural progression to try and take that process internally and try to automate it and make it more customer friendly from the user end. So I think that's how this conversation came to land in my lap. And I've learned so much from multiple individual and group conversations on the topic from people in the industrial space. So I really just am happy to have the opportunity to share everything that I learned. And there really is a lot of deep learning in these slides and in the conversation here that can't all be laid out in a couple of minutes. So please do ask questions. There's always something deeper behind everything that's in here. So ask any questions you have, share your successes and your failures, and we'll all kind of get a little bit closer to the tech stack perfection that we're seeking.
And since you mentioned the presentation, don't worry, you will be receiving a copy of the presentation after the fact. So I guess we can get started by sharing this first slide. And I know you have an interesting anecdote about the title.
Yes. Hang on. Sorry, I've got to move you over here so I can see my notes too. Yes. So the title was in a blog that I wrote. The title was Finding the Perfect Tech Stack. And I came to realize that that's not really a thing. So we changed the title of the presentation from Building the Perfect Tech Stack to Chasing the Perfect Tech Stack. Because after all of the interviews and conversations that I had while researching this topic, I have yet to meet anyone, even those who are happy with their systems, who's managed to create a fully integrated tech stack that eliminates every silo. So what I ended up learning was not what the perfect tech stack is, but which questions and considerations will help you develop the right tech stack for your company. And that's really what we're going to be discussing is going to be, the questions and considerations that you should be thinking about along the way.
So talk us through this real life anonymized example?
Yeah. So when we look at this, this might look familiar to you. And I am trying here. I'm so sorry. I'm trying there we go. Second. Good.
I think you mentioned,
There we go.
something interesting is that most of all these learnings are going to come from any journey. And it's like, you can't really solve the problem until you try to start solving the problem.
Right.
So, and I think that's our goal, is to, especially with this conversation, is, we understand people don't like their tech stacks most of the time,
Right.
but also they don't know how to fix that problem. And just helping you decide, make the decision, like take the first step and say, hey, let's assess this. Let's start addressing this.
Right.
Is what I'm looking forward to today, because you did a good job of breaking that down.
Yeah, so this might look familiar to a lot of you. This slide was created by a man who participated in one of our sessions, and it represents the different tools that his company is using. And for the most part, it's pretty representative of what a lot of companies are starting with. They know the functions that they need to fulfill, and there's a different tool for each of those functions. They don't really all work together very well. And so this is sort of their starting point. And the next slide might look familiar to you as well. This might resonate. Their primary concern with a tech stack revamp is to integrate ERP and CRM. That tends to be the top priorities for most companies, with billing and finance being the third most common priority. And all of the other lonely silos at the bottom will be evaluated, with the hope that some of those functions can be achieved with ERP and CRM programs that they eventually settle on, but also with the expectation that some of those silos are probably going to remain. And so before you even get started about thinking about the tools that you need to manage your process, you really have to understand what your process is. And that was part of our struggle. We had a very manual process. We had paper POs. We had, our company started with one person and grew to over 20 people in a relatively short period of time. And so what works for a sole proprietor doesn't work for a team of 20. And so we had to take all of the processes that were happening inside the heads of the people in our company and put them on paper and really make them tangible. So sometimes that doesn't mean just mapping what your process is. Sometimes it means identifying the problem areas and then defining that process, which is what we had to do, because the automation really only works when there's consistency and predictability. So your process has to be something that can be automated before you can jump into the tool stack. When you are thinking about what tools you need, it's really always important. I mean, in any area of what your company does, everything that your company does, every tool your company uses should be in service of your customer. You really need to keep your customers front and center throughout this whole thought process. Because if your tech stack is not actively improving your ability to delight your customers, or worse, it's creating friction and frustration, then it's time to address that tech stack and really think about what tools are going to make that process better, both for them and for you.
And I think that's seems to not be the easiest thing to naturally do inside of these orgs. But once you bring it up as a focus, it starts to click pretty quickly. But I think one of the struggles, especially, with the help of some of our favorite software vendors, it's very easy to not come at it from the customer perspective. And either I'm an internal department and I need this thing, or I know this tool can do this and I want to be able to do that. And, so it's coming back to the customer is a way I found to start to break through, as far as no, it's not for any other reason than this is how we serve the customer. We need to serve the customer this way. You agree you want to take care of the customers. This is how we do it in 2023. Right? Did you find that as you were kind of working with everybody?
Absolutely. And it might seem that there are functions within your company that are not directly customer related, but that is an illusion. If you think, well, what difference does it make what invoicing or billing software we're using? What we're the ones who have to deal with that internally. But in the end, what happens is if you have a system that is highly manual, and forgetting one thing is going to throw that off track. Now your customers have this experience where, well, we've received this milestone. We've reached this milestone in the project. I was expecting an invoice. I haven't seen it yet. Or I paid an invoice, but I never got a receipt. Things that seem like they're not customer centric are always customer centric. It's really the name of the whole game.
It really is. I think that's a super important point, because I think even like you said, down to the finance team, it's somebody you might not immediately think like this really affects customer experience, but clearly it definitely does. And what Chris was saying also resonated with me, which is a lot of times what you get is each individual silo making their own decisions about what works for them tactically. Like, we just need, this has this feature and we want that, or they think they want it. And then there's nobody who is really the voice of the customer in the process, who's championing the customer experience. Nor is there, even if the marketing team or somebody like that is worried about the customer experience, they're not in the place to inform all the other silos that they need to do something different because it's affecting the customer experience. So then this is where it really comes back on the CEO. So this is a scenario where you, Mr. CEO, you're uniquely responsible. You're uniquely able to care about this and to affect change organizationally so that this customer experience isn't negatively impacting your bottom line because your technology is messing up your team's ability to actually serve the customer.
Exactly. Absolutely. And that's my mantra, is everything is marketing. And I think that's another reason that this conversation often starts in marketing, because marketing is we're the ones who are the most concerned about the customer experience. And we see that feedback and we hear that feedback on where things didn't go exactly as they would have liked. And those things often aren't within our realm. If it's, the product was good, but the project ran late. Well, that's not something that marketing can directly affect, but we can try to help get all of our teams aligned so that we can maintain those schedules better. So I really think that keeping the customer at the center of every single conversation is really the only way to achieve success.
Julie, I kind of have a question there too, is how do you capture those moments where a customer says, I wish you would send me a receipt for that. It's a moment. You have all these moments happening in different departments that just get lost because somebody they can't take action on it. Like John said, it's in a different department or whatever. How do you capture that? Do you use some type of tech stack tool? Do you use a Slack or some channel? How do you collect that and have the important things that occur frequently with the customer kind of float to the top?
Well, and that's really the goal of the whole exercise, right? Is to break down those siloed walls of communication so that the feedback that's coming in all of these different departments and areas can all be stored in the same place, and we can all see it and have visibility on that. The way that really starts in our company is that with every project, we ask every customer for a question, to fill out a questionnaire at the end of every project with very specific questions about different stages of the project with us, what they liked, what they didn't like, what we could do better, what we did well, and what went as expected and what didn't. And all of that information is saved in our CRM. So what uses the CRM to our project manager if he's not in it, right? So that's really the whole point of trying to bring this unsiloed tech stack together. And that's where I think a lot of companies are struggling with exactly that question, Dale, because we have all this information. I'm aware of it. Business development is aware of it, but assembly isn't aware of it. And the information that was shared is that, well, the assembly took longer than expected. Well, assembly's reaction to that is, well, then design took too long, and design's reaction is, well, procurement could have started sooner. So it's bringing all of that feedback and information back into one spot where everybody can talk about it. And it ends up, without a tech stack that everybody's working actively in, ends up being a matter of putting all of that information into an agenda and discussing it in a meeting face to face. And how often can that happen seamlessly, right? So I think that the internal communication part has to be an integral part of the tech stack. And I think it's a part that's missing, even in companies where they feel like they have a successful tech stack or that their ERP is working for them, are missing that internal conversation. We use ClickUp. I know a lot of people use Slack. It's really an ongoing constant, what's the word I'm looking for? A constant improvement. We're always looking to make that part of it better, because that's kind of the meat and potatoes of the whole thing, is communication.
Not to derail the conversation, Julie, but you bring up an excellent point that many here in the call I know have experienced. When leadership draws the line between tech stack and communication plan, what is the best approach to bridge that gap and make sure that everybody understands that the tech stack conversation is to ensure that internal communication is working, and it's not just simply to get things done, quote unquote?
Right, absolutely. It's not just to perform all the functions. It's to make sure that all of those functions are in synergy as well.
I think a key part of it is that continuous improvement mindset has to be applied, and it has to be applied on like a lot of different levels. Tech stack is a tool. It's not enough in and of itself to solve any problem. There has to be goals and a strategy, KPIs. There has to be processes in place, training, measurement, and then like post-mortem on like what the heck happened. And that's like, 6 of those things. I don't know how many things I just listed off there, but like most of them weren't tech stack, right? They're actually like people have to do certain things. It's great if you have a software, but like if nobody's using it, if they don't know what they're tracking it, if it's not being measured, if it's being measured but nobody's looking at it, and any one of those things missing and the whole thing falls apart. And it's great, we have $200,000 worth of software, but we don't have any business intelligence. We're not learning anything. We're not doing anything any better. So it's like multifaceted. We talk a lot about tech stack because this is tech stack oriented, but the human element is not just the customers. It's the company and the processes and what the company emphasizes in itself that it's going to track and improve, and the decisions it makes are way more important even than a tech stack. It's just a tool to get those things done.
Absolutely. I mean, a tech stack isn't going to run your company for you. That's what the people are going to do. It's just having the right tools in place to be able to run the company smoothly. And that's really what we're talking about here is, what considerations, what questions, so what pitfalls to avoid, that sort of thing. And here we are. So know the pitfalls, right? The name of the game while doing this research for me was just identifying recurring themes, right? So when it comes to pitfalls, these were consistently the top 3: overpromising vendors, a lack of deep understanding on the part of decision makers, either of their needs or of the software capabilities, and the temptation to rush through the process. So seeking out experienced and neutral voices, that's important. Thinking beyond the sales rep can be a game changer in navigating these stumbling blocks. Just being aware of them from the start will give you a leg up in being able to navigate them. But but this is really a lot of the consistent challenges that are seen over and over again.
Yeah. And that's where like uh the organizational dynamics and the internal communications, the culture can really just, be a huge barrier when it's on the marketer all of a sudden to just try and even have the space to ask some of the questions that you've asked. Like, and that's super challenging. But you definitely learn how to do it in a way where, again, like if we can rally around the customer or just making things better for the internal customer as well, oftentimes people behind the closed doors of their silos are having the same pains and having the same, and even like these are smart people, so they also know how, they have ideas on how to solve the problem, and those are often aligned too. So it's about just getting everybody, together, and that's some of the groundwork that's
Absolutely.
required. But I think what's interesting is a lot of the stuff that you mentioned, John, and obvious, and especially continuous improvement. These companies know how to do this on the production and quality side of things because they have quality management systems that actually mandate that they do this. And it's about bringing that, out of there. So I think if you're on the customer side of things, like finding things like that in your company, that's like, oh, we already have that habit over here. Like, so maybe I can talk about it in that context, and that'll help it make sense for people.
Yeah, like when was the last time somebody in a manufacturing organization did a 5 whys root cause analysis of why the invoice came out on the wrong date or with the wrong number on it? Does it happen in some organizations? Maybe, but you're right. Like, okay, we used the wrong material in this this assembly or whatever, then that gets like deep dived, 7 layers down, but nobody's caring about any of those other things. But I think your stumbling blocks there, your common stumbling blocks there, I think those, those are more on the actual trying to apply the tech, trying to like shift or apply or implement some sort of tech stack change. And those are a complete different set of stumbling blocks. And I think a lot of those, I think the ones you had were over-promising vendors, misunderstanding of the needs of the project or not having a deep enough understanding of everything that's going on. And I can't remember the last one. Salim's pulling it up here. Oh yeah, rushing. These are things that we have talked about. I've seen these a million times. I think you can be as careful as you want to be, but like all of these things are still problems. Like everybody thinks they're doing it carefully, but like, you get some sort of software vendor, they tell you this is super common, especially in integrations. I work a lot in integrations. They say, yeah, we can integrate with XYZ. But like that out of the box integration, for instance, is never suitable for 90% of people's systems in real world usage, right? But they won't tell you that. You just discover that later as you're actually trying to do it and it doesn't work. Or like, hey, this data that you have isn't compatible with the data structure of our ERP system. We told you it was, but now that we're trying to actually implement it, it isn't. So now you have to transform all your data in some way. I think these are super real and super common pitfalls. I'm actually curious, anybody has any comments on how you overcome these pitfalls, like how you really prepare? Because I think most companies prepare for these. They try to have a good approach to their implementations, but still you run into these things anyways. What's a good way? Anybody have any good ideas on how you beat these pitfalls?
I think the first slide of questions for overpromising vendors, like if you don't actually have a documented process, like that's going to get you every time because you don't have your own practices to even compare to. So that first step of just clearly understanding the current state, and that's where taking that step while getting, like, I'd rather see us err on the side of every single person being involved than trying to say, oh, this piece is not important. This piece is not important. And that's where it does need to be on the CEO generally at some point to make that clear. Because you're not always going to get the buy-in you need to get the participation you need. And for some, it's not until they're actually participating when it starts to click, right? So that leadership perspective is in a lot of spaces actually like one of the only ways you overcome. And the I forget what the second one was now, but I think in all cases can we just have like adult conversations about this stuff? Like, this is in everybody's interest to get this right. Like, it should involve everybody. Like let's talk about it. And that's where the conversations obviously need to be constructive. And in order to do that, understand that's where, like, the culture and communications training, and just, this is why this is such a complex issue, right? Because if you don't have that kind of support, and it's so common, you mentioned at the beginning, Julie, like, one person is now 20 people. And I think just there's been so many recent things happening in the market, in the world, COVID being one of them, and the supply chain disruption. It's just disrupted the comfort that a lot of these companies had, because it was a slow and steady wins the race approach. And all of a sudden the racetrack just changed completely. And that's where you can't just knock on the door of the next office over to verbally communicate. And we don't know how to communicate if we can't do that. And that's where data management is a new concept. So the education behind some of these underlying concepts is a way to overcome, I think. So just education and painting it in a way like we've been successful to get to where we are. It's not that you've been doing everything wrong, but we know that our current state has these issues, and we can't keep doing things the way that we've been doing it.
Yeah, and your point about getting everyone involved is actually a perfect segue into the next slide. And I think it's worth going in a little bit deeper to this. Some of you probably don't know, but this conversation today actually arose out of a blog post that a blog article that I wrote, which goes quite a bit more into the team that you're going to have to pull together. But if Salim, if you want to show the next slide.
I wanted to take a moment. Laura
Yeah.
Tobin had a question.
Oh, yeah, let's hear it.
Hi.
Hi,
My
Laura.
question, hi. My question had to do with talking about events that trigger other events. So events maybe that trigger communication. I've been trying to kind of encourage that and find ways to educate people about how that could happen. But the response that I tend to get is kind of that, well, you can pull up a customer list that relays that. So, for example, things that, maybe if there's going to be a delay, it would be nice to send a notification. If people in sending surveys, we want to send surveys to people about their experience. So I can pull up a list of customers from a certain range or something like that, or have someone else do it. But shifting from that mentality to an event that triggers that survey to be sent. So, and I'm just kind of struggling with that. I don't know, getting people to understand that idea. So I wasn't sure if you had any thoughts or suggestions.
So I hope that I'm speaking to exactly what your question is, but your conversation or your question brought up an association in my mind in our company, which is that there are events happening in different areas. So like right now in project management, if we have a project that is in completion, once that project has shipped, and then I in marketing should be notified that, okay, put it on your calendar, 6 weeks from now, you should be asking this customer for feedback because they've received their machine. That doesn't typically happen because it's not on project management's radar. That to them is not part of what their job is. And having that conversation in person is not enough to cement it in their minds. They might say, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, sure, I'll do that. But in the moment, it's not top of mind for them. And I totally get why. And that's where we're hoping that our tech stack is going to take that responsibility off from them by, when they're in their project management, if we have an integration between ClickUp and Pipedrive, or just ClickUp and whatever else we're using at the moment. If in ClickUp is where we mark that project complete and shipped, then there's an automation. As soon as he marks that complete and shipped, it automatically creates a notification for me. And it takes that human responsibility out of it. And that's really the functionality that we're looking for in a well-integrated tech stack, is taking that repeated step that is consistent over and over and over and taking it off somebody's plate and into an automation. Does that answer your question?
I mean, in some ways, yes, but I think it goes a little bit beyond that, in that even that conversation about agreeing that it's not realistic for me to go into every office every day and say, is there anything that needs to be communicated, or pull a report of like, oh, what shipped today or who's on their 6 month, who's past 6 months at this point. It's, the idea is I'm really struggling to get that idea communicated, because it's not a matter of, oh, we think that's a good idea and we don't know how to do it. It's kind of like, I don't get the difference.
Got it. So that on my end was a totally different, it was a totally different exercise. It was mapping my process and mapping the customer process, or the company process with the customer, and putting them side by side, showing how they currently don't align and how they should align, and really selling that to the top, selling that to the owner of the company and saying, this is important. And then you only really have to convince that one person or that one small suite of people why this is important, and then it can trickle down from them. Because coming from me, if I say, hey, this is how we have to do things here, they're going to look at me and say, you're the marketer, you're not in charge of our process, but if I can convince the right people that this is how it's going to work best for the benefit of the entire company, then that change and that implementation comes from the top, and it goes a lot easier than you shouting into the wind.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Great. So this actually kind of feeds into what you were saying and what Chris was saying, which is enlist the cool kids, right? So Laura, I think actually you were part of the conversation where this term came up, and I immediately latched onto it, because you will need to designate a committee that will be at the heart of every aspect of the tech stack journey, right? Research, implementation, adoption, everything, training. And this should be the same core group of people from the beginning. But Chris, to your point, in these early stages, when you're researching the kind of functionality you're going to need, you need to have someone from every department. And preferably somebody who is influential in your company culture and somebody who is a power user in their department, somebody who really is respected in their department and who knows what's going on. If you can get those people excited and invested early on, it's a total pro move. They are the ones who are going to sell this implementation later on because they have some skin in this game. They put a lot of work into it. They have considered all of these things. There's a lot of information in the blog about how these people should be working together throughout the process and what their responsibilities at each stage should be. But the power of social buy-in is significant and it shouldn't be underestimated. So even on the small scale of your company, getting the right people involved who are going to be able to champion this tech stack and this new system in with the rest of the company is going to be really important later for adoption and adherence.
I wanted to add something that I learned in my career being an engineer and a marketer. I need to learn to let go of the idea that I need to be the one that's bringing forth the solution and let the solution be the priority, regardless if it's coming from me or it's coming from someone higher in the chain that I kind of convinced that this is the right solution. Things getting done is more important than people recognizing that I got things done.
Absolutely. And every single person has blind spots. There's not a single person in any company who understands the ins and outs of every job in the company and how each person in their specific role is going to need to use and evaluate and manipulate this information that's in this tech stack. And so making sure that it's something that's going to be functional and useful for everyone in the company is paramount. It's the only way that you are going to get universal adoption. And honestly, the other key to universal adoption is simplicity. It has to be easy to use. And I don't mean easy to use in the sense that you won't need any training, but it has to make sense. You need to make sure that you have a deep and thorough understanding of every app's capability before deciding you need to add more tech to the stack. So the less complex and complicated, the better. So, it's going to be a lot more difficult to take 8 different softwares and make them talk to each other than it is to have one software that can manage 4 or 5 of the functions you need and then only have to integrate a couple other softwares to handle the others. Keeping your tech stack as simple as possible is not only going to make adoption easier, it's going to make your workflow easier, it's going to make implementation easier, it's going to make the integrations easier. So really exploring all of the capabilities of each app to make sure that you're not overlooking an inherent capability before you pull in another tech stack or another program to handle that capability that's already covered pretty well there. So really make sure that the research goes in so that you can keep your tech. The deeper you go with your research at the beginning, the easier it's going to be for your final product to be simple. And that was a very complex way to say something very simple. Sorry.
Well, I'm glad you used that word complex at the end, because I think sometimes people conflate like complicated and complex. And that's the hardest part in the beginning about getting buy-in for the level of depth of the conversation and research you need to do at the beginning. Like, we want to create a simple system for people to use, but the most complex versions of those systems are the ones that behave the best. It doesn't necessarily mean they're complicated, but when you try to do it without understanding the complexity, that's when it gets very complicated, and almost everybody has a horror story about that. So that's where, it feels like a unicorn sometimes, but that's where just that nuance is not super fun in the early days when you try to get that buy-in. Like, no, I need to ask you all these questions right now. If we find this out later, it could cost a lot of money, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, I guess, let's see, all right, we're 11:45, so I want to make sure that we get through this because these next few slides here are really the meat of the process. So I stole crawl, walk, run from Mary Keough. I'm not giving it back, but it could also be broken out into selection, development, and implementation. So crawl is where you're doing your selection, right? As the name implies, take your time. Understand that you will likely reject far more apps than you adopt. It's important to spend enough time with your potential candidates to determine whether or not they're capable of meeting your company's needs and whether or not the user experience will be well received by your team. So you really need to be detailed and diligent in this phase and encourage your power user team to go as deep as they can in their research. They will ultimately be the ones who advise on app selection and be the adoption leaders. So they really need to get comfortable and familiar with every application that you're considering. And when you take that information into part two, right? So you've selected your softwares, you've got your tech stack assembled, and this is the part where you have to make it all work. So you've picked your apps. Now you have to pinpoint bottlenecks and data misalignment or siloing and get the apps in your tech stack working together seamlessly. You are probably going to need a developer if you have one program that does everything that you need it to do, great. You probably won't need a developer. If you need to integrate 2 or more apps to get all of the functionality you need, you will probably need to engage a developer. That means that any applications that you consider need to have an open API to work in. It's going to be really important. You need to let your team have time to experiment with your company's data and note the gaps. Anywhere there's a gap within the functionality of inside a particular application or between 2 apps, you're going to want to talk to a developer and see how you can clear that out. And then run, it's time to roll it out. You know, you've solved all those problems, right? It almost feels like the job is over here, but it's really just begun, because now is when you bring it to the company and see how it actually works in the wild, right? So you need to be intentional and targeted in this phase. You need to make sure that every user is getting the in-depth specific training that their role requires, but don't make everybody sit through everyone's deep training. So from a company-wide standpoint, you want to keep it high level, make sure everyone understands A, why the new system is being implemented, B, how it will simplify their lives, and C, how it will move the company forward. Anything more specific than that should be imparted on a departmental level. And this is where it's really important, again, that you have someone from every department on your power user team, on your core team, because each one of those people can now break out. They each have the full understanding of the whole system, but now they can break out into their own departments and teach their departments what's specific and necessary for them. And making sure that everybody understands how important it is to use the system consistently for data integrity. That's where your power users are going to be, where it's important that you have the cool kids, right, on your power user team, because they're the ones who are going to be able to get the rest of their department to adopt this and get behind it.
There's a concept that showed up in a couple of recent conversations that we've had, and I'm interested in hearing the thoughts of the group, which is when implementing a new system, the easiest way to put it out is with the colloquial term weaponized incompetence. Some users make it exceedingly hard that the system is not working. What are your thoughts about this, and how have you mitigated this if that happened in your organizations?
So I talk about this a little bit in the blog article as well. It's important when you're choosing your core team, your power team, as I like to call them, your power users, that you include people with different levels of tech savvy. So obviously you want to have the very experienced and technically savvy people on your team, but you also want to have someone, at least one or two people that you know are going to resist the change, who are going to be detractors and who could be voices against moving forward with a different system. Because when you bring them in early in the process and you can make them part of the process, they will not only on their own come to an understanding of why it's important, but they will also be the best equipped to talk anyone who is resistant through the process. So yeah, so stay the course. And this is sort of part of that, because it's really tempting at the first sign of the first problem to just say, well, that didn't work. You know, it's tempting to blame the system. So we need to try to resist that urge. One of the biggest issues is embracing the native logic. When you have an old system that lots of people maybe, or some people liked certain parts of it, it might be tempting to try and force fit an old method into a new system that fights the native logic. It just doesn't work. The apps have to be used the way that they're intended to work. And so backsliding into old habits or methods that don't mesh with your new system can create the illusion that your effort was wasted and your tech stack is a failure. So when there's a breakdown in functionality, make sure that you're going back and identifying and addressing the causes and making sure that they're not a result of fighting the native logic. It's important to go back and address that with retraining or updating standard operating procedures. Or if you go through that process and realize that, no, it's not a user issue, there really is a gap in our tech stack here, then it might be time to call another meeting of your power users and an integrator and see where you can move forward there.
Yeah. And before we get to next steps, like, it's just so key, because most of the horror stories involve, we tried it, it lasted this long, it did not work, we do not use it anymore, or we use it and hate it. And it's like, in order to stay the course, you have to know what the course is, right? And that's where the importance of that North Star, like with buy-in from the CEO, or sometimes the CEO is requesting it. And I'll just use customer portal as an example, because I'm already seeing that if you can figure out a way to contextualize what you want to happen in a very specific experience or change, like a customer portal, that always coming back to that being the goal, right? Instead of trying to, deal with some of these cultural, interpersonal problems that can pop up about, I'm having to change my job and I don't like it. And, some of the things that Celine mentioned, that's where you got to find a way to say, this is why we're staying the course. Like, unless we do we not want to have the customer portal anymore? Like, maybe that turns into a thing, like, for some reason, but that's like, okay, now we're changing that. And if we're changing that, let's have that conversation. But as long as that's the thing, this is how we get there. And it's pretty easy to see that when companies spend so much money and so much time on these implementations and then aren't even using them anymore, that was not a part of their process. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's just reemphasizes like all that research you have to do on the front end, understanding what you need to do so you can define clear objectives that have clear benefits. Like, we're not just doing this because it's fun to implement a new ERP. Like, there's specific ways this is going to make things better, so that you can sell. Or like Laura, I think it was, who had her question about, she was trying to sell the concept of automation upstream or whatever. But like, if you were the CEO there and you were implementing a system, you would want to know that Laura had this need and couldn't do it. And now you have the solution for it with this part, that's rolled into part of the discovery and why we're doing the changes that we're doing. And Laura, this is how it'll impact you. Like, if she wasn't the one who was trying to drive the change, but was having this change come down on her, finding ways where you can, the implementation of an improved tech stack should improve the life of not just the customers, but it actually should make more efficiency for the people who are working. And that basically means less work. It should basically be less work for you to use the new system. So, it might seem like more work, but it's actually less work, because you can get more work done in the same amount of time because things are automated or simplified or unified or whatever it is. So it's like this whole selling. There's a lot of selling, right? We've kind of like hinted at it, but I think like there actually is a ton of selling that has to go on. That's whether you're selling the whole concept up to the CEO and he buys it, then he has to sell it to all the department heads. Then all those department heads have to sell it downstream. There's a lot of stakeholders and a lot of selling involved just to get this kind of change to happen. Otherwise it won't happen, right? People aren't buying.
Absolutely. And to be clear too, stay the course only makes sense when every step leading up to the implementation was thoughtful and intentional.
Right.
You have to make sure that all that research, that your process that you need, that you're clear on your desired outcome before you start. And once you have that, then it's important to stay the course. I apologize for my dog. I don't know what she's barking.
No worries.
No, that's a good point, because too often it's like, oh, well, we bought the tool, so we're going to finish doing it. It's like, oh, that's not gonna end well. Like,
right.
Or like some part of the company understands it, but the whole company is going through the transition, where it's like, these guys decided it over here and they're ignoring like some part of the business. And that's when it just goes horribly wrong, right? And only like 50% of the people are buying in, because the other 50% are just disenfranchised because it doesn't apparently apply to them, even though it might. Just like, what's going on?
yeah.
Right. Yeah. So just real quick before, I know we're getting close to time here, but so I just want to throw out there really quickly, there is more information in the stack and in the blog about security and understanding your investment. You have to make sure that you're protected. I'm not a security expert. I would highly recommend that you hire one to do an audit of your systems and make sure that your data is protected. And I'll leave that at that. And then understanding your investment, there's going to be an investment. It's going to be significant, but make sure that you're looking at right size, right fit systems, right? So you don't have to get make a huge investment if you're a small company or if you have limited resources. So resist the temptation to overextend your budget, because you can pay as much as you want to pay for as many bells and whistles as you can get. But when you find a right size, right fit system, it will likely fall into the right spend. And when you have a thoughtful and well-constructed system, it should be saving you more than it's costing you. And then, for next steps, if you are a manufacturer, so I'm speaking directly to manufacturers now, the final data frontier for manufacturers is the data from your manufacturing floor. So unsiloing your production data is almost certainly going to require an integrator, but it's possible to do it, and it's possible to do it well. This is one of the things that we're best at. So if it's something that your company needs, feel free to ask questions or reach out to me directly. But it really is, we've been operating sort of under this promise of manufacturing 4.0 for a decade, and it's not nearly as streamlined as most expected at this point. For this reason, unsiloing that production floor data and making it a useful part of your data that's in your ERP system takes a lot of customization, custom software, sometimes machinery upgrade. But if that's where your company's at, if that's what your next step is, give us a call. That's what we do.
Love to hear that, Julie. Back in 2018, IoT, Industry 4.0, when I was still an engineer, everybody's like, we got to get on this. This is the next industrial revolution. And my first question was like, usually the revolution happens and then we call it. We're calling this one preemptively. So I love that you guys are working on removing the silos from manufacturing floor data, because that's been a problem that we've been trying to tackle for the last, 7 years.
Right.
Sounds like another episode.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So thank you to everyone who joined the conversation. We look forward to seeing you again on our next session, which will take place on the 14th of December. Anyone who registered will be receiving an email with a recording of this session, a link to download the slides that we showed here today, as well as a link to Julie's blog post that inspired this session. So if nobody else has anything to add, I would love for you to enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Julie. A lot of
thanks,
powerful insights today. Appreciate you being on.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. Hope you found it useful.